Okay, so in industry and in this lab, we're going to come up to a situation like this. We have a driven shaft over here. It's going to do something. It's going to make widgets on a machine, and then we have the motor. Now, there are many different couplings, as we already discussed, but this one we're going to be talking about the rigid flange coupling, and we're going to figure out how to get this thing as close as we need to. So here's how we start. First thing is we need to actually put these couplings on. So we're going to find our key. We're going to stick that in there. We're going to slide this actually onto the shaft. And what you want is you want to make sure that this shaft isn't sticking out past the face. So it could be a little bit in, but it can't be out. So we're going to stick that in there very closely, use our little key here, and we're going to hold it into place. Now listen, we're not going to tighten all this stuff down very tight, because what will happen is the set screws will mar up the shaft and make it to where things won't move in and out. Now with this one in a very similar orientation, again, we're going to rotate this around, and we're going to just put a little bit of tension on here so we don't have this thing move. Now we can actually do some comparisons, okay? Because this is moving. I have my motor loose with this situation. Now I can bring these two shafts up together and start doing some comparison. Okay, now let's see. Well, I got to turn the motor here. I want to make sure that the motor is sitting as flat as it can or as straight as it can. So I'm going to use my fingers on the outside, the fingers on the top and bottom. Well, wait a second. I can't really affect the top and bottom, because once I bolt it down, it's going to be stiff. But what I want to do is make sure that the rest of this is as close as possible. So I'm bringing it together, making it as close as I can, and then what I'm going to do is actually snug down my motor bolts here. And this is how I'm going to get started with this. It's very important to make sure that you snug these motor bolts down, because you're going to notice very quickly that it's going to start moving. So you may even want to hold your fingers here in alignment to stop it from moving in whatever direction, all right, to get too horrible of a misalignment as you're doing this. All right, this is not an uncommon situation here. These feet on the motors are actually made out of sheet metal, and they don't always come out perfectly in the manufacturing process, so as you're tightening them, they will start to make the motor shaft move around on you a little bit. And then when that happens, you're gonna think you had some alignment, and then you're gonna find that you actually had misalignment. Also keeping in mind the amount of torque that you're going to put on a 5/16 bolt. So now that we have that, now you can see that there is a little bit of a difference here, but the most notable difference that we actually have and we want to capture here is we want to see that there is no gap up here, but there's actually a gap down here. I can get my ruler in here, but when I pull these together, I can't get my ruler in up here. So that means that we have a vertical misalignment, and that is the very first thing that we want to check. Okay, so we've roughed this thing in, we've got it reasonably close using our fingers. We could also do this method here to where we see how far it is off side to side, but I think the finger method is going to work for this particular lab. Now that we've done this, now we actually need to start setting up indicators so that we can get a relationship between this shaft and this shaft. No problem, and here's how we get there. We're going to pull this thing back, and we're going to give us as much room as we can for this particular exercise. This here we already snugged up, so we're going to loosen this, and we're going to take this back as far as we can. We're going to snug it back up again. We don't want any of this stuff moving while we're playing with it. And we want to try to get roughly 5 inches in between here. We have a little less than 5 inches, but that's totally okay. We're going to make this work. Now, don't forget to actually tighten up where the shaft is, because the shaft was moving here. We already left this tight, and so we want to make sure that the shaft is not going to move. Now we're going to move over to an indicator setup. Now there's many different styles. This style right here, it is a little bit lighter weight. It can go onto a shaft. It uses this little V in here to line it up on the shaft, and then this little screw with the brass so it doesn't mar it up, and it holds onto it. This is a little light. For this particular application, I'm going to go ahead and break out this larger unit. This here is a little more hefty, and we can actually put this right on our flange. It's not going to hurt us because that flange is directly related to the shaft, and that is exactly what relationship we want, is from this shaft to over here to this shaft, or this coupling over here to this coupling. So we're going to need a few accessories out of here, and I'll start building them right in front of the camera. All right, so the first thing is we want to mount this base, and it's reasonably simple. You have a little screw here, and then you have the chain. We're going to set this on top. We're going to set our little barrel, if you would, inside of there. And I'm going to stretch this out as much as I can and get on the very last set of pins that will come in contact with that. And then it's just a game of tightening up the wing nut. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as quickly as we can. And hopefully we have enough adjustment here, which usually you do, because the kit is designed with a long enough stud. So we want to make sure that's nice and snug, because we are going to put a little bit of force on this as we add the other components. The other components that we're going to add, we're going to have something to hook the indicator to, so we're going to go ahead and run this stud down as far as we can, okay, and generally it's going to come in contact with the shaft, and it does so right about there. Now as soon as that happens, you can back it off a little, and you're going to run this nut down, and then you're going to use that as what we call a jam nut. So with a 15/16 wrench, we're going to give it a little snug. We're not going to make it too tight because, again, we're only actually clamping with that chain, and we don't want to distort anything. So the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and take the head end cap here, and we're going to screw that down a considerable amount, and then we want to make sure that this threaded stud is actually kind of sort of lined up with our shaft, and then we can use this little jam nut here, and we can work with our wrench and our socket and make sure that that is sitting in the orientation that we want. So it may take a little bit of finagling here or there. You may even loosen up your stud, but that's okay. All right, it looks like that's reasonably straight, and if we need to make some adjustments later, then that's not really the end of the world. Okay, now in a much like fashion, we're going to go ahead and find our threaded stud. Back in our kit here, there's actually another component that we're going to need in order to link these things together. And we're going to need some connectors here. So these connectors have a hole this way and a hole this way, and it's going to help us actually connect all these things together. All right, so we have a threaded stud here. We also have a longer threaded stud. I think in this particular case we're going to need the longer one, and we're going to do a very like fashion. We're going to run this in as far as we can, and then it looks like it's about a 1/2 inch wrench. We're going to use a jam nut here. It's very important to have everything tight because if anything moves with these indicators, it's going to give you some false readings. All right, so now what we want to do is to start putting our connectors on here. They're spring loaded, so you may have to put a little force on them in order to get them to overcome that. The next thing is we're going to have a connector piece here. Looks like this part slides in there. No. All right, so again, it's not perfect. Every set is a little different. The only thing that I do want to keep in mind is that if you use this connector on this side of the shaft, then this connector should be on the other side of the shaft in order to try to bring back to center where your indicator center is. So we're going to slide this indicator in here. We're going to try to adjust it down to roughly where we want to work with this, and likewise out to where we want to work with this. And it's a little hard to see right behind my fingers, but I'm just working back and forth here in order to get this set up. Okay, so now that we have this and everything's nice and tight, what you want to do is actually mark the flange so that you know where you're starting and you can also keep these in line. You want this flange and this flange to be in line, taking the measurement at the exact same place. All right, now while we're up here at perfectly vertical, we can go ahead and use this face to turn the dial around to 0. And then from here, what we can do is start to rotate around and notice which side of 0 it goes on. It looks like the negative side. And we're going to rotate all the way down to the bottom. Then we're going to break out our nice little mirror here. And we're going to make sure that we use gravity, but get that all the way down at bottom dead center. With our mirror, we can rotate this around to where our mark is. And then with our mirror, we can also take a reading. This is on the negative side. So I have a little over -20. Okay, so what that means is that it is actually going away at the bottom, and then around here at the top, okay, it's closer and farther away at the bottom. So that's how we actually measure vertical misalignment. Next video, we're going to talk about how to correct vertical misalignment.